Hello, my name is Jessie Sheslow. I'm the Director of Community Relations at the Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee. Thank you for tuning in to this important post-film talkback based on the film Shared Legacies. In case you haven't seen the film yet, let me give you a little background. Originally, this post-film talkback was meant to be with the director, Dr. Sherry Rogers. When she and I spoke the day before the program, she asked if I would like to have Dr. Clarence Jones, a principal in the film, join her. Of course, I said absolutely. What you are about to see became more than just a conversation about the film with its director. It became a conversation about the instrumental role the Jewish community had in the civil rights era of the 1960s. Dr. Jones was there by the sides of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Joshua Heschel as they were changing history. His voice is so important to hear, especially today as our country is in another, not new, another battle for racial equality. Whether you've seen the film or not, you'll want to tune into this conversation. Thank you again to our sponsors, Fran and Jack Braverman, the Sarasota chapter of the NAACP, Embracing Our Differences, and of course, the Heller CRC. Please enjoy, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining this Heller CRC exclusive post-film talkback from the film Shared Legacies. I'm thrilled to report that nearly 400 households in Sarasota and Manatee counties tuned in to see this important film. Both the film and talkback have been generously sponsored by Fran and Jack Braverman, the Sarasota branch of the NAACP, Embracing Our Differences, and of course, your Heller CRC. The Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee's mission is to strengthen Jewish life and identity in our community, provide for Jewish people in need, and promote support for Israel. Therefore, we are thrilled to provide our community with new and innovative programs virtually, especially now when times are still so uncertain. Please know that the opinions of our guests today do not necessarily reflect those of the Jewish Federation, and that this webinar is being recorded. I am so thrilled to announce that in addition to Dr. Sherry Rogers, we have Dr. Clarence Jones, a name and face you may remember from the film. This will be a conversation. You may ask questions at any time. Please use the chat box to do so. I'll do my best to get to as many questions as possible. So let me introduce our guests today with ladies first. Dr. Sherry Rogers, a licensed clinical psychologist and activist whose work encompasses educational programs, curriculum development, public speaking, and event development. Dr. Rogers has spearheaded many initiatives in order to raise public consciousness on the issues of genocide, racism, oppression. She is the founding director of Building Relationships, Inc., Spill the Honey, and serves as a trustee of the Institute of the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Dr. Clarence Jones is currently an adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco and a scholar, writer in residence at the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute, Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, and the director of its Institute for Nonviolence and Social Justice. In a distinguished and heralded career, Clarence Jones served as political advisor, counsel, and draft speechwriter for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He joined Stanford Weil and Arthur Levitt Jr. in Carter, Berlin, and Weil, Inc. as an allied member of the New York Stock Exchange, becoming the first African-American partner in a Wall Street investment banking firm, and has been twice recognized as Fortune magazine's Businessman of the Month. Through his work in the civil rights movement, he has dramatically impacted the course of American history. Among other things, he coordinated the legal defense of Dr. King and other leaders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference against the libel suits filed against them and the New York Times by the police commissioner and other city officials in Birmingham, Alabama. He assisted Dr. King in the drafting of his celebrated I Have a Dream speech that he delivered at the March on Washington, August 28, 1963. I am honored to have both Dr. Rogers and Dr. Jones with us today for this important conversation. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start off with a question for Sherry about your involvement as the director of this film. What was your origin story for wanting to make this film?
Well, I went with my girlfriend of mine to the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit. I'm from Michigan, and Dr. Clarence B. Jones had just written a book called What Would Martin Say? And as a draft speech writer of many of his speeches, he had the right to say, what would Martin say? And one of the chapters was on anti-Semitism. So as a Jewish woman, as an activist, I was really just so taken when he was talking about how much he cared about anti-Semitism and how Dr. King cared about it, and how the Jewish people were so involved in helping to change history. So we developed a friendship, and a few months later, actually, President Obama was in office, and Dr. Jones was being honored at the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, in which the Obamas attended. And there again, among so many important things he discussed at the Kennedy Center, he brought up the Jewish involvement in the civil rights movement. And there are many books on it, and many people hold up the famous picture of Rabbi Heschel walking in Selma and marching in Selma, but there wasn't really a lot of film footage in this particular area and witnesses to this coalition. So, I thought it was important to document this, and I don't want to talk too much, but when President Obama had invited Dr. Jones to the Oval Office in Washington, he had mentioned that the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech, the 50th anniversary of the Selma and Montgomery March was taking place, and he asked Dr. Jones if he was going to be there. And of course, he said he was going. So I thought, what a perfect place to start filming the eyewitnesses to this historical coalition, given that the marches in Selma on the Edmund Pettus Bridge eventuated in the Voting Rights Act for Black Americans.
How long was the process, really, from start to finish, including interviews and research and...
Well, it started in 2015, actually. Well, maybe a little bit before. And so it's 2020. So it's been a little while.
A labor of love, but we're thankful that you did create the film. Now, Dr. Jones, I understand that you were the person who was able to get into the Birmingham jail to get Dr. King's famous letters from Birmingham jail. In one paragraph, he speaks about how he would break the law in Nazi Germany to stand with his Jewish brothers. Can you expand on the meaning and the gravity of those words?
Oh, yes, I can. That reference in the letter to the Birmingham jail, which occurred in April 1963, was just one of several references during Martin King's life, during his speeches and writings, in which he emphasized and reminded both Black and white audiences of the importance of the alliance, the working relationship that had developed between the African American and Jewish community. So that reference you refer to in the letter from a Birmingham jail, I think, if my recollection, he says, if I had been in Hitler's Germany, I would have defied the law, something like that. I would have disobeyed the law that would have prohibited him from working with, being with Jews. But you know, Dr. King, I mean, I don't have to say the obvious, right? In his 39 years alive on this earth, he was an extraordinary man. And maybe there were others, but I'm not aware of it because I only knew him by working so closely with him for 7.5 years when he was 31 and I was 29. For the next 7.5 years, I became his political advisor, personal lawyer, and draft speechwriter. But the important thing about our subject matter is that Dr. King was very, very smart is a colloquial word. So I would have to say brilliant and erudite. He understood in 1960s, and certainly that whole period in 1961 and 60 till he was assassinated in 1968, he understood that no matter how important it was on the merits, what African Americans could ask for, no matter how we might demonstrate, how we might hold meetings, no matter what we might do. The fact of the matter is, we were only 12 maximum, 12% of the population. And there was no way that 12% of the population was going to impose its point of view on the issue of ending racism or ending racial segregation or any other issue. It wasn't going to happen. In spite of the crazies around us, there were some black left-wing crazies who urged us to take up arms against Whitey. We weren't suicidal. In no way that a small percentage of 12% of the population is going to overthrow the United States government by armed force. That's just an imitation of suicide. Plus, we weren't into that. But the point is, he understood that the only effective way to end the racial segregation was you had to build a coalition of support outside of the Negro community, as we were referred to at that time, because 12% of the population couldn't do it. Our task, a formidable task, was to convince a majority of the 88% of the population that was white that it was in its self-interest also that racial segregation be ended, that all this nonsense that took place in Birmingham, police dogs and fire hoses, that this is not the country we were. And we learned from empirical observation and experience, not what anybody told us, not what we thought might be, but we knew with our own eyes. We learned very soon, we came to see that of that 88% of the population that was white to us, there was a significant segment of that 88% of the population. They looked white in most cases, except for some of the Sephardic Jews that came from, you know the history of the Jewish people better than I do. But the point is, there was a significant segment of white people who happened to be Jews, who were most active and came to our support, active support. And at first, it's one thing to have somebody tell you this, right? It's one thing to have a discussion, but I traveled with Dr. King around the country, and I'm not a bashful person by any means, and I'm an inquisitive person. So occasionally I see a Jewish person. I was 30, as I said, I met him when I was 29 and was with him until I was 37. So during that period of time, I would ask a white person, why they were here, why they were with us, why were they participating in this demonstration? And almost always, I got an answer that was similar, but they had individual differences. But the common thread was something like this. Well, Mr. Jones, speaking to a woman, maybe from Long Island, my grandparents were in the Holocaust, and my parents talked to me about what happened to my grandparents in Hitler's Germany. And we talked at home. And somehow, as I watched on television, and I watched what was happening to Negroes, this seemed to be the kind of things that my grandparents had told me that Hitler tried to do to us in Germany and in Poland. And so I just felt I had to come and help out in any way I can. That was literally a common denominator. Common denominator that there was something in their own personal experience that ignited their conscience. And often it was something having nothing to do with Dr. King, having to do with the concept of justice and fairness. It may be that they had a Negro friend in high school or in college or something, whatever it was. But the point is that they could not sit idly by and see what was happening to us Negroes without wanting to join and see whether they could help us. Now that, what I'm telling you, that's not a fairy tale. That's reality. That was repeated in so many different ways. Now I can tell you, for example, one of the most notable publicized of our supporters was Abraham Joshua Heschel, right? I remember Abraham Joshua Heschel saying to Dr. King, he says, you know, Dr. King, when we came over from Poland, we came to Detroit. And we noticed, we being other Jews who were with him, we noticed that there was a strange similarity in the way in which white people in Detroit treated and talked to Negroes, very similar to the way in which people in Poland treated and talked about Jews, very similar. That's that there was an uncanny similarity that there were white people in America that would treat Black people a certain way, just as there had been white people in Poland who treated Jews a certain way. And that way was demeaning, to hurt them, to not believe that they were worth anything. So I don't want to diminish from what an extraordinary person that Martin Luther King Jr. was. Whatever you just heard me describe, or anecdotal stories, but let me just say to you, as I said to you, his political understanding of the dynamics of America, majority white, and Negroes. He was a biblical scholar. That PhD he had was a PhD from the Boston University School of Theology. And he was not the only one, but the only one that I knew that had such an intimate knowledge of the history of Jewish people. He was familiar with the Talmud. He was intimately familiar with many things in Jewish history. And at times when he would be preaching, sometimes to a predominantly Black audience, he would use a reference out of Jewish history to make his point. So the empirical experiences, as I've said, and then you had certain things which history would not deny. In 1964, for example, I think it was 1964, whenever it was, they had Oxford, when they had the call for, white people to come and join the voter registration campaign in Mississippi, you had some 1,300 people who came and joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to go and register Blacks in the South. It was during that experience that Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Cherney were brutally murdered by the Klan. Schwerner and Goodman being young Jewish boys because they were working to register Black people to vote in Mississippi. So, nothing, the great French writer, oh God, I'm getting old, but anyway, said, not more powerful than the march of mighty armies is an idea whose time has come. When I was younger, a few months younger, I remember this. It'll come to me later, but that's the point. The point is,
let me ask you.
To Sherry Rogers. Sherry Rogers didn't even know it. She didn't even know it. She had no way of knowing. She had no way of knowing when she met me. There's nothing I special said. Nothing. I mean, I don't know what I said, but she had no way of knowing that when we met and talked, is that there was a connection. Whatever we said when we first met and talked about, whatever we said, it reached very deep down into Sherry Rogers' experience as a Jewish person. Because I mean, see, a number of your people don't know Sherry. Sherry don't have to do this. I mean, she's an educated, wealthy woman, got better things to do than talk to some old, poor, broken down Negro like me.
Please.
But she's got a soul. She's got a soul, and she's like a dog with a bone, Sherry Rogers is. Once we became friendly, and once she understood as I understood, she became, it's like I became Jewish and she became Negro. We became evangelicals together because we understood that she understood as I came to understand that the sadness is that too many people in the Negro community at this time, and I will say the Black community, and too few people in the Jewish community know the history. They simply don't know. They simply don't know what I'm going to say to you and what is a matter of historical fact. Okay? It was the 24/7 active support of the American Jewish community during the Civil Rights Movement that made it possible for us to succeed. We could not have done it without them, period. End of sentence. Indisputable. And so that the film, film is a very form of opinion persuasion, She had the, she's, as I said, she's beautiful, but she's one smart dude, And we both understood the power of film. We both understood the power of images. And we both, it's like we both had the same bone, and wouldn't let it go.
Well, this really leads to one of the other questions that I have. The film focuses intently on the close relationship between the Black and Jewish communities in the 60s,
right.
Especially with Dr. King's close relationship with many prominent rabbis
right.
and Jewish leaders.
Right.
And you say in the film that in order to redeem the soul of the United States with all the racial animosity, that we need that coalition of African-American and Jewish communities. Can you tell me from where you sit, do the communities today look as strong as they were in the 60s? And how can we achieve that again?
In some ways, yes, and in many ways, no. Okay? First of all, what has happened is that following the period after Dr. King's assassination from 68 on through up to today, you've had various gyrations of conflict and animosity that has occurred between the African American and Jewish community. You've had some idiot African Americans who engaged and spewed a lot of garbage of anti-Semitism. And when it occurred, regrettably, I'm just telling you what the facts are. Some prominent African Americans who should have spoken up were silent. They didn't. I spoke up, was silent. You know? And so, and then I don't know, I was thinking the other day, how did it come to be that the dispute between the Israel and the Palestinians, which is a very serious dispute, how did that come to be? Like, how did, whether on what side you were on that issue, how did that become the determining factor as to whether Black people and Jews were going to work together? I mean, how did that occur? Okay. Now, I mean, I follow history, you know, and it's evident from, if you see the film, you know my position on the state of Israel and Jews. But I'm also mindful that there are a number of African Americans today who have confused. They have confused their understanding of how to build a coalition with the Jewish community today, with their disagreements with Israel's policy toward the Palestinians. Okay. Now, my position, as the son said in the film, is clear. Okay. I support the state of Israel, and I will support the state of Israel. Now, does that mean that I am muted and will not be critical of the state of Israel? Of course I'm not. Okay. But I'm not going to engage in any kind of political nonsense that wants to destroy the state of Israel. That's not going to happen. Okay. I am prepared to be as critical about Israel's policy toward the Palestinians as anyone. But I'm not prepared to take that criticism and make it the litmus test as to whether or not I want Jews or I welcome Jews to support the civil rights movement. I don't know how it came to be. I don't know how it came to be that, I mean, the Palestinians must be some powerful dudes. How did it come to be that the question of to what extent the current generation of African Americans are going to support the Jewish community is going to depend upon what the current generation of African Americans thinks about Israel and the Palestinians? How did that come to be? Well, hey, I'm not going to let it happen on my watch. Yes, I have, the Sherry knows this. Dr. Rogers, I call her Sherry. Sherry knows my distinct differences with Netanyahu and so forth and the Palestinians. But Sherry also knows that I'm not stupid, okay? I am not going to condition my support for the Jewish community. I'm not going to support for the Jewish community or even to defend the existence of the state of Israel based upon what this current Israeli government, you know, Netanyahu's been in power for a long time here, but he's not going to be there forever. So I'm not going to let Netanyahu's government determine how I feel and what I'm going to do about Israel. I'm not going to let that happen. I got legitimate criticisms about the current government, Netanyahu governments toward Palestine, but I'm damn sure I'm not going to permit anybody in the civil rights movement, any Black person in the civil rights movement, come and tell me, well, you know, I can't support, you know, Dr. Jones, I can't support working with Jews in the civil rights movement because of what's going on in Israel. I'm going to say, you what? Have you lost your mind? We can have differences. What, have you lost your mind? Have you forgotten the years of blood and toil? Have you forgotten that we wouldn't be where we are in America today? We could not have done it alone, but we would not have been able to do it without the Jewish community. Now, does that mean that the current Jewish community in Israel gets a pass? No, I'm ready to put my foot up behind of Israel anytime they do something wrong. But I'm not going to participate in any kind of nonsense that's going to equate whether or not I want Jews to support our movement for civil rights, depending upon whether they agree or disagree with a position that the current government of Israel is involved in a policy I don't agree with. Hey, we should walk at the same time.
How do you feel about some activists using the terms colonialism, apartheid, when
I can understand. There is let me tell you something. There is, if you look at it, if you just look at it on the historical similarities, I can see how one could look at the historical similarities and just say that the current policy toward Palestinians bears some of the similarities of apartheid in South Africa, bears some of the similarities of colonialism, bears some of the similarities. Does that make Israel an apartheid state? No, what it means is that if Israel doesn't correct its foreign policies, it runs a danger of becoming a foreign apartheid state. Does that mean that that I have to run Israel out of the United Nations? No, will not happen on my watch. Okay. Mm-mm.
So I have a viewer question that is related. Many in the Jewish community take issue with the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter for the anti-Israel language in this 2016 platform. So for those who feel negatively about that, do you have advice for how to still be strong allies in the fight for equality while staying true to their Zionist foundations and beliefs?
Yes. They should say to the Black Lives Matter movement in this platform, they should tell them to remove that anti-Israel garbage from its platform. That they want to work with the Black Lives Matter movement, that they support the Black Lives Matter movement. They're not making, let me put it this way. They would be less than candid and honest with the leaders of Black Lives Matter movement if they and those who went before them in the Jewish community, who worked so hard with the Jewish community, would not to say that they're offended by some of the language, okay? That doesn't mean that the Black Lives Matter movement has to agree with everything that the American Jews who want to participate in the civil rights movement, but you gotta say it, you know? And if you can't say it, I mean, I've said it. Okay, and don't permit yourself to be painted in a box where you can't be candid and say, on the one hand, I support. I mean, I'm speaking as a Jew. I'm not a Jew, but speaking if I were Jewish, I'm just intellectually saying, you know, I support what you're seeking to do in the Black Lives Matter movement. But as a Jewish person, I can't support what you're doing when it comes to the state of Israel. And these are the reasons why. Okay? And I think instead of running away and hiding from a dialogue about it, bring it out in the open. That's my attitude.
And there's so many amazing coalitions that are happening now.
Right.
From the Andrew Goodman Foundation, where on college campuses around the United States, they're making sure that there isn't voter suppression and they're getting work done. Whether it's from other organizations like the American Jewish Committee that worked with Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence from Michigan and Congressman John Lewis to create the first Black Jewish caucus after there was a rise in anti-Semitism in Pittsburgh and Charlottesville, that they felt that our history was so important that they implemented a Black Jewish caucus. So that's bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, that this issue, that our two communities understand racism, and there's enough of a common thread, not only in our history, that we have a moral responsibility to come together to end this racism together, that there's enough there that it goes above politics. So much so that after this movie we showed in Atlanta, that we also welcome so many amazing people, including Derek Johnson from the National NAACP, the president, that Morehouse had invited me over the next day and handed me a book called Black Jewish Relations from Dillard University, which was a national conference papers on Black Jewish relations by Samuel Cook, who put together in the 80s a whole conference on the history of Black Jewish relations, because he thought it was so important to really, that our two communities had done so much amazing work together, that we understood this and we needed to continue this work. And the other day I was on a webinar and I was listening to Reverend Warnock that really has taken on from Ebenezer Church, where Dr. King was the pastor. And when Mr. Brooks was just murdered by a police officer in Atlanta, it was amazing that he invited Rabbi Berg, who's now the head of the temple, to be a part of that eulogy for Mr. Brooks, which is a beautiful thing, because both represent our history of our working coalition, and they're working on amazing prison reform work. There's so much to do in America that we need to get things done here and have these, you know, whether it's Israel or whatever conversations that we need to have happen. We need to communicate our personal feelings and you know, our as Rabbi Heschel said that in the movie that his daughter talked about, if you don't know how somebody else feels, then you're not really understanding me. And you know, or Dr. King's Strength to Love. The idea is, you know, we have to have these conversations, and hopefully this film can be a bridge to have these important conversations, but at the same time, not lose out on what we did together and gain the lessons from that and mobilize together today in America to work on such important things, whether it's prison reform or voting suppression or so many poverty, so many issues that I think that is being done here in America, and we need to do more of it.
The other thing that annoys me is that, I mean, however it happens, you see, however it happened, I mean, Israel can do whatever it wants to do. I mean, I'm going to criticize it, so forth, but I'll be damned, you know, I don't want another country. I don't want Israel or anybody else determining what my attitude is going to be about my own country. Okay, now I know there are legitimate grievances. I'm repeating myself, you know, but the legitimate grievances between the Israelis and the Palestinians, particularly now with this crazy, this is my point of view, okay? I think Netanyahu has gone off the rails with this proposal to annex a substantial part of Palestinian lands. But does that mean that I want to throw Israel out of the United Nations? Does that mean I want to close down Israel so it collapses? No. It means that I'm going to be critical every day I can of Israeli policy that I disagree with. But every day I can, I'm going to affirm, through my criticism, my undying devotion to the state of Israel and its continued existence. There's nothing incompatible with that. I can put my foot up Israel's behind and still tell them I love them.
Thank you for that. Sherry, let me ask, someone has been asking, will the film be shown commercially? And if so, when and where?
Well, we're in discussion with many people, and you know, I'm sure it will be at some point, but right now I'm thrilled to have these important, courageous conversations and webinars from state to state, and I think it gives us an opportunity to hear back from the folks, you know, around the country. So I think, you know, who would believe this horrible situation with COVID is actually, you know, for our film and with what happened with Floyd, how terrible. There's a national focus on racism now, and we can hear from folks all over the country to contribute to this important conversation and dialogue. And I'm just thankful for our film to, you know, be able to be a bridge to start to be used for open dialogue and communication and just further the needle on these kind of courageous conversations. And I'm hoping someday it will be, but right now that's not our focus.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jones, another question from a viewer. Are there any modern day MLKs who can lead this current movement, which truly right now has the opportunity to make sustainable difference?
There's only one person that comes the closest, and that's Bishop William Barber. There's only one person in my experience that comes the closest to Martin King today, and that's Dr. William Barber from North Carolina. There's nobody today that even comes close to Dr. King except Dr. William Barber.
I think for a lot of the viewers, this might be a brand new name. Can you give a short, reason why you say that?
William Barber is a clergyman, and he has put together in North Carolina a coalition of all different religions, substantial number of Jewish people, carries forward the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., William J. Barber III, I think that's his official title. You asked me the question, and that's my answer.
Great, thank you. I think that is a bit of a call to action for a lot of us to go research and learn more about Bishop William J. Barber III.
Right.
Now, I'd say this question is for Sherry, but really it's for both of you. Given the events that have unfolded since the George Floyd murder, would you change the ending of this film?
Well, I think we're looking to use this film as a discussion point to further the discussion, as I said before. And, we'll see based on all the, discussions from state to state. But truthfully, this is bigger. This film needs to be used to have these conversations. We might be editing in some of the discussions that are coming about since, Mr. Floyd's murder absolutely is, a watershed moment in history that has highlighted and laser focused the world on talking about racism. And I just think that go ahead.
This film, as it is, creates a basis for having a different kind of discussion. than it could have occurred before had not George Floyd's murder occurred. I think this film provides an ideal platform and opportunity to carry forward and to conduct discussions raised by the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. By the way, let's understand what's happening in the Black Lives Matter movement. You know that for the first time in the history of the United States, remember I said earlier, Dr. King was smart. He knew that no way to 12% of the population persuade 88% of the population. Well, guess what? A majority of the 88% of the population have now been persuaded, because you have more white people in the history of the United States that I have ever seen since Dr. King supporting the common effort of decency and morality. You have more white people, okay? The reason why the Black Lives Matter movement is so powerful is because you have more white people supporting it today than ever supported what Dr. King sought to do. The Black Lives Matter movement today is a reflection of the very dream that Dr. King had. At the March on Washington, we had 275,000 people, 20 to 25% of whom were white. Unless you are deaf and blind and you don't have a cell phone or a television, and you look at the news, your eyes are not lying to you what you see. What you see is outside the United States and within the United States. A majority of the people who are supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, a majority of the people includes African Americans, and a substantial segment, I would say, I may be going out on a limb on this, but my eyes don't lie to me. I believe a majority of white people now support the Black Lives Matter movement, because they realize that it's not just talking about Black lives. They're talking about, if Black lives don't matter, no lives matter. They get that.
We are coming close to an end. So I want to ask one last question to the both of you.
Okay.
What lessons do you hope that the viewers leave with after seeing this film?
Let me speak first. The lessons I hope is that they will look and listen to Dr. Sherry Rogers and know that Sherry Rogers is a symbol, is emblematic of the very best that comes from the Jewish community. And that she, along with others in the film, and myself, what we're trying to do, putting it bluntly, is we're trying to play it forward. We're trying to be a compass for another generation. And we think by causing them to pause and look what actually occurred, not what somebody made up, that looking back of that history of the bonds and alliance that occurred between the African American and the Jewish community, which I said earlier, and I would repeat, had it not occurred, there would not have been a civil rights movement, a civil rights bill of 1964, a voting rights bill of 1964, a housing bill of 1968. None of that would have been possible without the active participation of the Jewish community.
I feel the Jewish community owes a tremendous debt to Dr. Clarence Jones for being one of the lions who believes that it's important to, to have the other lions talk about this history. And as a Jewish woman, I'm so proud of our history, using our own slavery all the way from 3,000 years ago to encourage us to be sensitive to other people's pain. And that, when people say, well, Black Americans, their slavery is 300 years old. And if they're talking about it now, well, every Passover, we talk about our slavery 3,000 years ago, not just as a history lesson, but to stand up today, to have empathy, to work together with other people who are in pain. And I think the Jewish community has something, you know, that using our pain for good, for working with other people, for knowing it's not just all about us. Not only, yes, it's in our best interest, of course, like it was in the 60s, to care about the Black community and other communities that are in pain, because we know that we've been attacked historically over and over again, and we will continue to be attacked. So by working to help another community, it also will help us. But at the same time, it's part of our history to stand up and for morality. And I feel so honored for Clarence for caring about, you know, of course, he's now heading a whole nonviolent program, reminding people of the importance of Dr. King's nonviolence in terms of dealing with problems or whatever. But I'm so grateful that he cared enough about this history that he was willing to lend his name and his working effort to making sure we have other people like Ambassador Young and Reverend C.T. Vivian and all these other people that are still alive today that gave testimonies to the importance of this Black Jewish coalition, because I think there's more work to do. And I think knowing our history will only mobilize people today to work together, despite there might be differences. Just in spite of our differences, there's a lot to do today, and we have a lot to be gained by pulling our resources together and working together.
Well, thank you both. I think I speak for the entire community and those who are here on the meeting today, that when everything is safe, we would love to have you here in Sarasota, and we could continue this conversation. I want to again thank our sponsors, Fran and Jack Braverman, the Sarasota chapter of the NAACP, Embracing Our Differences. And thank you again to Dr. Sherry Rogers and Dr. Clarence Jones for being here and for the work that you do and will continue to do. From all of us at the Jewish Federation, we want to thank you for joining this event. Stay safe and be well, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and I'm so grateful to the Federation. Thank you. Thank you.